It seems to me, first of all, from what I understand from doctors, that's really rare. If it's a legitimate rape, the female body has ways to try to shut that whole thing down.
And when it comes to establishing your worldview, I was curious, what newspapers and magazines did you regularly read before you were tapped for this to stay informed and to understand the world?
I've read most of them, again, with a great appreciation for the press, for the media.
But like what ones specifically, I'm curious that you...
all of them, any of them that have...
Can demonic spirits attach themselves to inanimate objects? The answer is yes.
Welcome to Twatwaffle of the Week. A bit of house cleaning before we begin. Last week, our guest on Beyond the Trailer Park asked how I chose articles to include in Twats. As I mentioned, I do headline shop, looking for possible outrageous stories. After background research, in my case I'm generally reviewing other media, I try and determine if the story is as cringeworthy as the headline suggests. In many cases it isn't, or the story is still developing for me to determine if it's worth the attention. Basically what I do is to see if other media pick up on the story and give it coverage I believe it's due. Generally, the story comes to my attention, and depending on my personal schedule, it may be 3 to 5 days before I actually script out a Twats episode. Then another 1 to 2 days before I record and edit. So about a week goes by between choosing stories and recording. Very rare will you get breaking stories on Twats. And I do this intentionally to avoid promoting what has become known as fake news or misleading stories. What I hope you will get are stories that are important but just buried under everything else. And yes, being that I do follow the fringe, you will get some nutball stories. But sadly, the fringe is no longer the fringe, something I realized 4 or 5 years ago. Onwards and upwards.
Kansas bill claims LGBTQ community is a religion to justify every kind of discrimination against it.
This is from Zach Ford at Think Progress. Quote, nevertheless, the bill lends some insight into the minds of anti-LGBTQ lawmakers as they ponder how much leeway a Supreme Court with a conservative majority and a rightward trending judiciary might give them. Further along, but what makes HB 2320, the Marriage and Constitution Restoration Act, unique is how it frames the rationale for such a massive reversal. It asserts that LGBTQ identities constitute a religion, and if the state of Kansas were to support any law that recognizes that religion, it would be in violation of the First Amendment's Establishment Clause. End quote. As Zach notes, being gay is a matter of faith, and while it may not be an institutionalized religion, it is, these lawmakers assert, the equivalent of secular humanism, which was recognized as a religion by the Supreme Court in a unanimous 1961 decision. The article in general, the descriptor of HB 2320, in my opinion, is a travesty. Zach describes it thusly, quote, perhaps unsurprisingly, the bill is particularly concerned with the issue of marriage. It attempts to standardize the term parity marriage to describe any relationship that isn't between one person who is born male and one person who is born female. These parity marriages include marriages between more than 2 people, persons of the same sex, a person and an animal, or a person and an object. Keep that last item in mind. The ramifications of this, according to Zach, are very unsettling. Quote, nevertheless, the larger concern isn't whether the Supreme Court would suddenly change its mind on nullification. Rather, these challenges to marriage equality could provide an opportunity for the Supreme Court to revisit the question of same-sex marriage now that Justice Anthony Kennedy no longer sits on the bench. The court wouldn't have to condone nullification to use that opportunity to weaken the marriage equality rule, Kennedy wrote, or otherwise grant states some sort of exemption, religious or otherwise, to bypass it. Yeah, this fight isn't over. As an addendum to Zach's report, he posted an update stating that the exact same day Kansas lawmakers introduced their bill, a group of Republican lawmakers in North Carolina introduced a nearly identical bill. HB 65 cut out a lot of the rhetoric that was in the Kansas bill, but along similar lines it contends that marriage equality is a form of secular humanism that the government cannot endorse. It also includes similar language such as the reference to parity marriages, which it says are immoral, non-secular, subversive to human flourishing, and go against community standards of decency. And the reason that I said to keep the marriage between objects in mind, the language appears to have been originally devised by none other than radical activist Chris Sevier, who has filed many frivolous lawsuits challenging marriage equality. He is particularly infamous for arguing in various suits that states should legally recognize his marriage to his laptop. If that isn't depressing enough, it has been reported that the bloviating windbag, Pat Robertson, is still alive.
Pat Robertson, LGBTQ people will destroy everything to ensure society legitimizes their weird way of doing sex.
The incredible thing about the homosexuals is they are willing to destroy lives and destroy the whole fabric of society so long as they and their weird way of doing sex is legitimized. That's what they want, and they will to take away everything. They'll destroy marriage, they'll destroy families, they'll destroy, in this case, the foster children. They're willing to tear down the entire edifice in order to have the majority of people recognize the way they do sex. That's what it amounts to. And 1%, ladies and gentlemen, get it, 1% of the country, from what we understand, are lesbian, 2% are homosexuals. And that is all. And yet that 2% and 1% are taking charge of the rest of us because they're so vocal and so authoritative, and they apparently dominate these legislative bodies. I think if Christians begin to speak out and insist that if some politician goes along with the gay agenda, that they're going to be voted out of office. And once they get that message, they'll start saying, well, we want to listen to the majority of the people in our society. Until they do, that small minority is going to be dominating everything we do in every aspect of our lives. Mark my word, it's going to happen.
How in the world, how I pleasure my partner, destroy the fabric of society? Maybe if Robertson stopped thinking about what parts go in what holes. Never mind, maybe I shouldn't finish that thought. While not specifically twat related per se, it is an important reminder why science literacy is important.
Deadly disease caused by raw milk has already put 19 U.S. states on high alert.
The gist: U.S. officials have warned over and over again that raw, unpasteurized milk can carry dangerous and potentially deadly bacteria. In today's climate, that information is basically falling on deaf ears. Disease outbreaks caused by raw milk are on the rise. So the CDC put out an alert, primarily based upon a report from 2018 where a New York resident was diagnosed with an infectious disease called brucellosis. And that was from drinking raw milk from Miller's Biodiversity Farm in Pennsylvania. They were able to track it. What the CDC was able to confirm was that this farm's raw milk did contain a rare strain of Brucella bacterium, specifically RB51, which is resistant to first-line antibiotics and can be difficult to diagnose because it has flu-like symptoms. And why this is an issue is ever since pasteurization was first discovered in the mid-19th century, it has been saving lives. Basically, if you're not familiar, by heating milk to a high enough temperature, we can kill the brucella and other illness-causing germs that hide within raw milk. Bovine tuberculosis and typhoid fever being two of such. Prior to pasteurization, these diseases or illnesses used to claim hundreds of thousands of lives. Nowadays, the milk you find in the supermarket is pasteurized to prevent such from happening. But some people are beginning to eschew these products, and they say that raw milk is the way to go, saying that pasteurized products cause allergies and contain fewer of the healthy enzymes and nutrients that raw products do. The problem with that point of view is that there is no or very little scientific evidence to support those two specific arguments, and most experts warn against consuming raw dairy products. So, I'm gonna spread the love today. This is a story out of Kerala, a state on the southwestern Malabar coast of India. Just to show you that stupid is not just a US problem.
Women who wear jeans give birth to transgenders and autistic children, says Kerala professor.
And this comes from India Today, which states, "This has been going on for a while now. Teachers and professors from across the country have been making their way to national headlines by making ludicrous claims on how women should behave, dress, live. It seems like this exclusive club of sexist academics is ever growing. Meet Rajith Kumar, a botany lecturer at Kalidi's Sri Sankara College, who has a long history of coming up with sexist and homophobic theories. This is what the doctor said on a live TV show recently. Quote, "A woman who dresses up like a man, what will be the character of the child she gives birth to? These children are called transgender or napumsakan. There is more. A report on the News Minute points out that Rajith Kumar had stressed that good children are born to men and women who dress and live as men and women, whatever that means. Quote, when a woman degrades her womanhood and a man degrades his manhood, the girl born to them is manlike. The child this girl later gives birth to will be transgender." The paper goes on, "That's not all. Dr. Rajith Kumar also believes that autistic children are born to rebel men and women, especially women who wear jeans." Again, no words. Our last story, for this week anyways, has to do with an idiot who thinks that antibiotics will keep people from dying from measles or its complications. In other words, he's totally fucking clueless regarding how things work.
Amid measles outbreak, Texas lawmakers want to make it even easier to opt out of vaccines.
Quote, Texas State Representative Bill Zedler doesn't understand the fuss over the resurgence of infectious diseases. "When I grew up, I had a lot of these illnesses," he said, listing measles, mumps, and chickenpox. "They wanted me to stay at home, but as far as being sick in bed, it wasn't anything like that," said Zedler, an outspoken anti-vaxxer and a longtime member of the House Public Health Committee, who has worked in the healthcare industry. The only lawmaker with an A++ rating from Texans for Vaccine Choice, an anti-vaxxer group, who was born in 1943, 2 decades before the measles vaccine was developed. During Zedler's childhood, about 450 people died of measles each year in the United States. 48,000 were hospitalized, and a few million more got the disease, according to the CDC. The introduction of measles vaccine in 1963 virtually eliminated measles in the United States by 2000. According to Zedler, they want to say people are dying of measles. Yeah, in third world countries they're dying of measles, Zedler said, shaking his head. Today, with antibiotics and that kind of stuff, they're not dying in America. Zedler says he's adamantly in favor of freedom of conscience and against mandatory vaccination. This is not the Soviet Union, you know. Unfortunately, Zedler's comments about the treatment for measles indicate how piss poor his education, or how educated he thinks he is about the virus. The measles is a virus that has no known treatment and cannot be improved through the use of antibiotics. Antibiotics, for those of you that do not know, are used for bacterium or bacteria. I don't know which one's the plural. Oh well. So, even though the CDC is currently tracking an outbreak in Texas, with, at the time of recording, there were 8 confirmed cases, Zedler and many other lawmakers are attempting to basically pass legislation to expand vaccine exemptions in the state. The bill being proposed by Representative Matt Cruz would not allow the state to track the total number of vaccine exemptions. And this is a travesty. Stay smart, people.